Russia-Ukraine talks, all the mediation efforts, and where they stand. Nearly 4 years into Russia's war on Ukraine, multiple peace efforts have been started, but no end is in sight. 1 week ahead of the 4th anniversary of Moscow's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, United States-led peace talks in Geneva ended for the day earlier than scheduled on Wednesday. The talks, which are being mediated by Steve Witkoff, U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy, and Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, are just the latest of a number of attempts to end the deadliest fighting in Europe since World War II, and none have reached a breakthrough. During his presidential campaign in 2024, Trump claimed repeatedly that he would broker a ceasefire in Ukraine within 24 hours. However, he has been unable to fulfill this promise. Here is a timeline of the mediation efforts to end the Russia-Ukraine war, which has killed more than 1 million people, as it heads towards its 5th year. The first ceasefire talks between Russia and Ukraine took place just 4 days after Moscow's full-scale invasion in February 2022. The meeting lasted about 5 hours, and featured high-level officials, but with diametrically opposing goals. Nothing came of their talks. Then, the two sides held 3 rounds of direct talks in Belarus, ending on March 7, but, again, nothing was agreed. On March 10, the foreign ministers of Ukraine and Russia, Dmytro Kuleba and Sergey Lavrov, met for the first time since the war started, on the sidelines of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum in Turkiye. A second meeting between senior leaders in Istanbul towards the end of the month failed to secure a ceasefire. Then, the withdrawal of Russian forces in early April from parts of Ukraine revealed evidence of massacres committed against the Ukrainian civilian population in Bucha and Irpin near Kyiv, in northern Ukraine. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said this would make negotiations much more difficult, but that it was necessary to persist with the dialogue. Russian President Vladimir Putin later declared the negotiations were at a dead end as a result of Ukraine's allegations of war crimes. In July 2022, the Black Sea Grain Initiative was signed by Ukraine and Russia with Turkiye and the United Nations in Istanbul. It was the most significant diplomatic breakthrough for the first year of the war. The agreement aimed to prevent a global food crisis by designating a safe maritime humanitarian corridor through the Black Sea for cargoes of millions of tons of grain stuck in Ukrainian ports. Ukraine's Zelenskyy presented a 10-point peace proposal at the Group of 20 G20 summit in Indonesia, within which he called for Russia's withdrawal from all Ukrainian territory as well as measures to ensure radiation and nuclear safety, food security, and protection for Ukraine's grain exports. He also demanded energy security and the release of all Ukrainian prisoners and deportees, including war prisoners and children deported to Russia. Russia rejected Zelenskyy's peace proposal, reiterating that it would not give up any territory it had taken by force, which stood at about 1/5 of Ukraine by then. China proposed a 12-point peace plan calling for a ceasefire and the end of unilateral sanctions that had been imposed by Western nations on Russia. Beijing urged both sides to resume talks on the basis that the sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity of all countries must be effectively upheld. The proposal was criticized by Western allies of Kyiv for not acknowledging Russia's violation of Ukrainian sovereignty. In June 2023, a high-level delegation of African leaders, led by South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and including the presidents of Senegal and Zambia, visited both Kyiv and St. Petersburg to present a 10-point plan focusing on de-escalation and grain exports. Analysts said it was driven largely by the war's impact on African food security and fertilizer prices. But Ukrainian President Zelenskyy rejected the call for de-escalation, arguing that a ceasefire without a Russian withdrawal would simply freeze the war. The following month, President Putin pulled Russia out of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Saudi Arabia hosted representatives from 40 countries to discuss Zelenskyy's peace formula, but no final agreement or joint statement was reached. In a major surprise, Beijing sent its special envoy, Li Hui, to the talks. But Russia was not invited, and the Kremlin said the efforts would fail. The June 2024 Summit on Peace in Ukraine, held at Switzerland's Begenstock Resort, brought together more than 90 nations to discuss a framework for ending the conflict in Ukraine. The summit focused on nuclear safety, food security and prisoner exchanges, though Russia was not invited, and several nations, including India and Saudi Arabia, did not sign the final joint communiqué. A month after beginning his second term as U.S. president, Trump posted on his Truth Social platform that he held a long phone call with his Russian counterpart, Putin, in a bid to restart direct negotiations aimed at ending the war. On February 18, delegations from Washington and the Kremlin, including U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, met in Saudi Arabia. They laid the groundwork for future negotiations, but the talks raised significant concerns in Kyiv and Brussels, as both Ukraine and the European Union had been sidelined from the meeting. 10 days later, on February 28,